Hi, I'm Angie Burnham-Miller, and welcome to TED Talk WVU. Today we're talking about the history of distance education. We'll talk about the great technologies that have led to where we're at in distance education and the history behind them. And finally, we'll talk about the curriculum methods that are needed as you structure your courses for distance education. First, I'd like to talk about the history of distance education. The Lyceum movement is a nod to Aristotle. Aristotle was a student of Plato who went on to find his own school with the Peripatetics, and he would also run into some of our favorite ancient figures such as Diogenes the great cynic. And at Lyceum, which was actually a temple built for Apollo, they would have great philosophical debates along with scientific debates, but it was a sort of informal educational setting. The modern Lyceum movement that we see from 1826 was founded by Josiah Holbrook, who gives the nod back to Aristotle by hosting public forums. Now, one thing that we didn't have in 1826 that we're blessed with now would be television, radio, internet, things that we enjoy doing in our spare time. So in order for education to really start to spread and for them to see the famous orators and public speakers and writers of the day was to attend one of the Lyceum public speaking events, and that was the only way that they really got that. So the Lyceum movement continued up until the Civil War, where it sort of hit a transitional time and went into the Chautauqua movement. But first I have to talk about the Morrill Act. So the Morrill Act realized in 1862 that there was a need to teach rural Americans about farming, about the mechanics of farm machinery, about agricultural studies, so that after the war, we were back rebuilding at least the part of America that we currently have at that point in history, as far as their agricultural needs and taking care of American food needs. But after the war, we get back to the pedantics of philosophy, to the need to talk about public speaking. So the Chautauqua movement comes in, and now instead of just being scientific based, they've added the fine arts. And a lot of that is still prevalent today with Chautauquas. Mother Chautauqua, of course, is the founder of the whole movement up in New York, but then the daughter Chautauquas have spread out and all across the United States. We are seeing that there were Chautauquas going on. It still exists. As a musician, I can tell you there's every summer at Lake Chautauqua, they actually have an entire musical experience for directors and famous musicians around the country to go to. But it was really pivotal in rounding America, which sort of brings us back to Aristotle yet again and Plato's philosophy on education, that to truly be a civilized world, that we have to look at the fine arts, that we have to look at public speaking, and we have to look at good citizenship before we ascend into the higher realms of mathematics and sciences. So that's a little bit on the history of distance education, and to really understand how we move forward after the mail service suddenly at the Chautauqua movement is able to do correspondence courses from the University of Chicago, and the whole world starts to be able to learn regardless of where you're at, thanks to the mail service. We have to move into the technologies needed for distance education. After the mail service sees correspondence courses happening in the late 1800s, we sort of move into this new area of newfangled radio, where Americans were gathering for fireside chats around the radio to hear what was going on. And as every technological advance happens, something interesting and creative is happening with how we're learning in America. Fast forward to the creation of the FCC in the 1950s. Without the FCC, we wouldn't have the creation of public broadcasting networks, and without public broadcasting networks, we wouldn't have distance education that became telecourses, and we wouldn't be learning, like I did, to cook from Chris Fenimore on PBS in Pittsburgh. You had to have every little development line up in order to become where we are today. Television also offered telecourses. Now let me tell you about telecourses. So I took a telecourse in 1995 on anthropology. I watched 10 one-hour videos And then I took a final, and I had a few assignments to complete. I started on my course 11 days before the final. I binge watched. I am the mother of binge watching. But I don't remember anything from that course. And as a high school teacher, you'd think I need to know anthropology. You should see some of the kids I deal with. But this interesting thing started happening in 1997, 1998. I was finishing up my undergraduate, and here come these Blackboard course management things online. And when I started in my current position in 1999, many teachers were still using those little squib books to keep their grades, the nice little blocks. Yes, I still have colleagues that love their handheld grade books that they write in that I've never used in 20 years because I've always used some sort of online grade management tool. I think it keeps me sincere, it keeps me honest, and it also helps me keep tabs on the 200 kids or so I see a day. It was more like 500 when I started teaching, I'd see a week. That was a bit much. So after we get into online grade books, then we started getting into blended learning lessons. My students at the middle school level would participate in the piano online course where they would have certain assignments that hooked up to the keyboard lab that was run by Yamaha way back in the day. Incidentally, that's where I learned about binary code because I had to actually physically rebuild it when I was hired. After I did that, I decided I want to get my master's degree. I don't want to be in a course while the fine arts were really important to Chautauqua and they were really important to Plato. I'm sorry, modern America, I'm a filler, I'm a babysitter. Even though my kids leave with knowledge, I don't matter in the grand scheme of things. If there's cats, they're taking my job first because I'm superfluous. So I was like, I gotta do something. So I went and I said, I'm gonna get my degree in multimedia, my master's degree, so I have a computer background because they're not going anywhere anytime soon. So I first experienced online learning in 2003. Very young in the process. We used a little bit of Blackboard, not a ton of it, but it was really starting to transform the role of the professor and the role of class time, where our class time might be a 30-minute lecture and the next 2 hours would be taking place in a lab and the professor would sit in an office and we had a question we could go ask, but it really removed him from the equation and made it way more hands-on. As a constructivist, I like hands-on. But after that, we move forward and all of a sudden we start to see online MOOCs, larger classes where I'm taking a course for micro-credentialing and how to be a better media teacher. Well, that's amazing because my principals, they're not media people. They're not music people. One's a special education major, one has a degree in philosophy, and one has a degree in English. So how are they going to teach me media? They can't because they don't know. And it's an ever-changing field. Education, the good rules of teaching that we see from Gagne, that we see Bloom's taxonomy, those have not changed in years. But what is changing is all of the pedagogical knowledge that you need with technology coming into the classroom. So now I'm able to take classes. I've taken Adobe Education Exchange, micro-credentialing, they call them badging there. But I'm talking to people from around the globe. How do I do what I do? How do they do what they do? They know more than my principals. And my principals, they still come in and they're observing me and they're telling me how I can adapt the Gagne Bloom taxonomy part of my day, but they can't help me. And I want to grow pedagogically as a media specialist and as a musician. And then here we are now. eCampus, fully online doctoral program. It removes the need to drive to WVU. Right now I'm doing this project on this beautiful stage located on a cheesy green screen in my classroom. So what it's done is it's made something that would be difficult for me to attend be something that everyone can attend. Just like the mail service to the Royal Americans, learning about agriculture and the ability to bring people together to build knowledge through shared collaborative learning. The final part of this TED Talk that I need to address this morning is the styles of curriculum that we're looking at for how we structure distance learning.
Take me out to the ball game. Take me out to the crowd.
Distance learning, as I've heard from a wise man once, is a large umbrella that covers many different types of educational structures. But there's not one right way and there's no wrong way necessarily. But the only way you're really going to get to learn is getting them actively engaged in whatever process you've chosen. So we've been talking a lot about deterministic versus emergent. And of course, deterministic comes from determinism, where one step is necessary for the next step, and it's linear in process. So everybody starts at the same point, everybody ends at the same point. In deterministic philosophy, it's the same thing. Every step is an antecedent, it requires an antecedent to continue in the forward linear path. So then that also leads to emergence philosophy, which is not the opposite, but a different view on education than deterministic planning. So in emergence, the sum of the whole is greater than its parts. It accounts for us all bringing our life experiences into our learning experiences. So I have a media background. You might have guessed that from this little presentation I'm throwing together here. So as I'm doing this assignment, I'm going to bring in more media than somebody that, say, has a background in educational philosophy, that you're going to wipe the floor with my description of Aristotle and his cynic friend Diogenes and Plato. Like, I understand it, but that's not my background. And we all have these different quirks that we're bringing, but we're all arriving at the same TED Talk. They won't look the same, but they're all about the same concept. And that's the emergence philosophy, that everything is greater than, the whole is greater than the sum of the parts. So how do I relate that to education? So a deterministic model. I'm going to use my neighbor. I'm not giving you her name. My neighbor one day decides she wants to build a bookshelf. She drives to IKEA out in Pittsburgh and she buys a bookshelf. She comes home, she reads the steps. All she knows is she needs to build a bookshelf. So she follows through that little book, the little book that tells you how to do it. Step A through step, probably double Q at this point because it's IKEA. So she has a bookshelf. But then the emergent model would be, I also decide I need a bookshelf to put A Brief History in Time, a copy of the Catholic Bible, and some other great book that I can't think of off the top of my head on. So instead of going to IKEA, I know basically what needs to happen. I know that there are shelves. I know I need brackets. I know I want it stained so it matches the rest of my furniture so it doesn't look weird in my house. So I go to Lowe's after work today. I'm gonna pick up some wood. I'm gonna go home. I'm gonna build a bookshelf. But instead of using a step-by-step chart starting with, I don't even know how to cut wood, I can saw wood from planks and make it the right size. And then I'm gonna build this beautiful bookshelf. I might even carve a little pretty thing for on the top so it looks smashing. My books are gonna fit right on that beautiful shelf when it's finished, just like the books, Her Cat in the Hat and her Dr. Seuss series fit on her shelf. We both have a bookshelf. They're both functional. Hers would be, any beginner starts with pre-cut wood, screws with letters on them because people don't know the difference between a ½ inch and an inch. Help us, America. And she's gonna build that bookshelf. And anybody that goes to IKEA and buys that is gonna end up with the same looking bookshelf at the end. I'm gonna get my bookshelf and I'm gonna handcraft that bookshelf using the skills I've learned from childhood with how to use a bandsaw, how to use a router, dovetail joints. I'm gonna do everything that I have to do to make a beautiful bookshelf. Same functionality, different ways about going about it. So, I hope you've enjoyed my TED Talk. I tend to ramble. I'm sorry. I'm pretty invested in education. It's my fave. That's why I'm still here. 20 years. Love teenagers. I know that sounds weird and you all think I'm crazy. I'm not. They're amazing. So thank you for coming to TED Talk WView today. And I hope you enjoy the rest of the TED Talks. And thank you.